You're gonna act like a rock star, you gotta be a rock star. No. We need to make deleting data feel more positively similar to recycling. There's so much data in this world that goes to our memories, and most specifically, I find that there's a worthy question in how much there is a disturbance of our natural and long-standing evolutionary front in terms of our data storage. I've looked at it a few different ways. I think number one, it goes, okay, well, are we just going to continue amassing a stockpile of data? And what does that look like spiritually? Within the energetic realm, is there a confluence that is disturbed by all of a sudden there now being this blockage almost of what was more naturally flowing in the past? And it was reliant on maybe other data for centuries until there was the next advance. But as I've said in the past episodes, that there's a lightning in a bottle construct that will begin anew once that magnificent ability to view something and hear it or to sense it in any of its five senses becomes almost automatic as we record more and more. The other side is that there's a wave function kind of application, and within the double slit experiment, famously there is the collapsing of the wave function for an observation to occur. And I've wanted to draw some sort of connection within my feelings about reputably and constitutionally, principally, directing everything that I create into the world with the sense that I'm not trying to collapse a wave function, and that I want it to be predictable, and I want there to be a justice amongst what is so ever nearly chaotic. But recycling, that feeling of utilizing each different container and product with the sense that I've done every little thing to get it to its next place. And in data, what does that really mean? Maybe we need to even do something more than just throwing it away, and the recreation, the reusing of that data maybe will reveal a whole next area, a way of thinking about our spirituality. Again, is a major focus of the way that these energies are physically real and not necessarily studied in a scientific application towards maybe needs for emotional and sociological constructs to find their better ways first before we can have everybody seated at the table. But the genes, the genetics, the DNA, I'd like to say thanks in the fact that those genes are playing a strong role in our ability, and we can lean on the fact that there is so much strength in every one of us, and those that do find the troubles and the misplacings of their talent, they're just a quick direction change and jump towards something that hopefully suits exactly what their history is telling. And within DNA or within GNA, the God nucleic acid, not the deoxyribonucleic acid, the God nucleic acid is something that I thought was interesting because it's the GNA, and if you think about the genes, why is it genetics? The generative generations, Gentiles, but thanks to genes and the GNA. Glossary. What began as a play on the word thought, with a T missing at the end, thos, and then with insight jumped to glossary. Bridge the gap into an available comparison with glossary, and finding the root of that word to be glossa, with the meaning of tongue, it invites one to think that thosa might be seen as the mind's tongue, the area of the brain that articulates the motion of an ideological center in our common understanding of the world in which we live. I seek to explore the current occurrency of normal typicality within our mental modes of cognition. I've recorded sound bites to the sound effects of various frequent happenings that I believe will most help a shaping of advance into further parts of speech by looking at where those words of ours start, the events of change that give us pause. I will use those effects in effect to build each weekly episode onto a based segmentation of what comes to inspire best, a partition of the week's news and considerable perspective writings that with every prayerful sighting might bring an evolved ability to adorn our expressions of the language and use with greater fluidity and meaning and complexity toward progression. So, with each episode building a more developed approach and ultimately a larger sequencing of our communication, I will examine the bigger points of view and present a glossary of thinking that, with diligence, aligns missing pieces to the puzzle that is society's confusing mix of histories in a form that I think helps put edge to edge and befitting in many flexibilities, gives access to deeper purposing when it seems most impossible at present to see music in the messy with any clarity. Glossary. Episode 6. Meditate. Or is that meditate? This episode, as hard as it might be to ascertain the title sequence, is truly about meditation. Though, when I think about different words, I typically decompose them. I try and follow my senses towards something that is new or worth revisiting. And the letter M, I think, needs to be called most into question with the em'd, it, ate. So as you see it, it might be, okay, well, you use the M, it's a verb, and you ed with the past tense, so it's the action of emming, it ate. So it becomes ate, and it might help for me to just open up with how I thought about this. And it was within the context of a meditative pain and kind of a nag, kind of something that kept me wondering, because it wasn't necessarily something that was on my side or not, with the pointedness of its hope being that I was more being called to experience it out of my own willpower still, but with its damage to my cells, because it was certainly something that could have been occurring. It also appeared to be opening up a portal of its own, and that's where there might be a sense of loss in regards to what might be your understanding of your health and sanity. But I largely live in a place at this point in my life where the pains that I feel are opportunities to tap into the God matrix and to create and meld my influence with the body of knowledge that is so much more than my own, and to offer up what I know are hopefully opportunities for there to be sites of giving and continuity and a divine gifted truth telling instance that we are all one. And it was in this time period that I got the first idea about this topic after I had the title. And it was every will you feel from someone hurts. And the wills of other people, I don't think, are entirely in our regards at all times. But when I thought about this, I believed within the fact of my God concept towards living the beautiful divine purpose of my hopeful potential. I thought, okay, well, within that, if everybody's will upon myself hurts, if I own the degree of that willpower, does it not hurt? Does it not influence the damage to my cells that I would ever so not want? With a moment to think about that, I think it would probably reveal that every one of us can at least imagine that kind of operation within ourselves. And I don't think that's exactly what I meant em'd at 8. For me, I kind of meant more that there's a passing of our willpowers in ways that we have constantly been developing. I actually have considered that within ourselves, within that single-celled soup of sea and water, chemicals of the early earth, that those cells developed something that is a sense that they have, but we've largely lost touch with. And within a hypothesis, I've also constructed that as we get farther and farther away from the usefulness of that, and even our bodies whole together, communicating genius towards every cell's best interest, that we'll start to realize how much that hurts. And as much as we rely on AI for everything, every aspect of our cognitive reasoning and our creative depictions of our language can largely be perfectly organized within some ideal set by our developing AIs. I, again, go within this point of our single cells having this sense that within the sea of the ancient earth, that those single-celled organisms were behaving without any said influence of larger creatures that they had to adapt for, and that as we have dealt with oppositional forces from more or less above us in the food chain, I think we have certainly had to consider how much past ways of living are fading away. I think one of the large discrepancies within biblical literature and us now is how much more the people of old had divine sense for things that developed powerful abilities within people that were unevolutionarily advantageous for the whole group at some point. That's running off again on this fact that as we exert our willpower amongst the world, there is a conversation that occurs there. And within the potential for that to damage the cells, there isn't a lot of explanation. But does it hurt? Does it pain the cells to understand that they're awaiting a conflict that'll largely incapacitate their life force energy? The honor and good regard of others, I think, is likely a place where you might again be able to see this sense of our willpowers and the exerted deficiencies of our sense to bring that truthful impart towards where meditation seeks to alleviate and relieve. The honor and good regard come with effort, and in other means, sometimes I think most of our time spent dreaming, daydreaming, or seeking different concepts out of our memory can largely run us amok into instances where we are operating to bring the telling of the universe or society to its next resting place, meeting place. And honor is something that connects immediately to honest, and regard is all about a relational aspect. They're fundamentally concepts that we have to represent our relationship with other things. Amongst this idea of searching my memory, I happened to come across an idea just recently about the fact that, and this was a past insight of mine, that there are all a whole many questions out in the world. On our quests, there are the paths out into our possibilities. But it is out of many that they actually become. And what I'm saying is that one question has nothing towards its reality unless there is a relation between those questions. There is only the possibility, but it's the interaction of them that is becoming. And I think that's a really important segue amongst these attempts to try and come up with the best picture of what would date within my understanding and within what it means to eat, and the past tense of the ate. Both emmed and ate exist as things that are defining the past in our language. But then particularly the meditate is, I think, very revealing that my attempts to describe this act of bringing a meeting of our willpowers into something that creates energy, with the 8 being kind of it's turned into its suitor, its predator, its consumer above it. It lines up within at least the conceptual sphere that I'm thinking. In instances where you're unable to meet, there is the point of that there is a lack of ability to meditate, and that as much as we can strive to create those connections and work fluidly, I'd say, what occurs when there is something missing? And what do we do in that situation? Do we create out of the inability to meet and bring consummation in a given moment? Or can it turn a dark, or when there's a tempting, maybe, that you tempt within your need to have that meeting? And I'll get to that a little bit later, in terms that will help refine this sense that while we are meditatively seeking an optimization, there are distinguishable nature that reveal that we need to be bringing our efforts to support the ability of that meeting. Solace in definition. In the creation of our words, there's been the long-telling reestablishing of what sounds correct for us in our feeling, and amongst all the many languages, the ways in which we have adopted other people's words, other tribes' attempts to bring their emotions into the spoken and sound forms that are pleasing, I think. And pleasing not necessarily in the good sense, but pleasing in the right sense. And as we seek those M's, and as we try and create the experiences of our experience, the world in which we are taking in largely starts to look really frightening and threatening when it's unfamiliar. And less so when we can share those communications with others with words that have the similar definitions. It's not always necessary that we have our words in perfect toe as a society, but there is largely something that brings peace resolution into possibility as we share the definitions. And the definitions that we seek, the many different words that we have in our word banks, is an ongoing kind of experiment and adventure, I think, for us in a world where we kind of are splitting academically. We are very economically disjointed, as much as it's easy to say. We are spread apart by income inequalities. But within our language, I know much of my mission and calling relates towards breaking down words from their largely, less cryptographic than what I believe exists in a better possibility. And I think when you think about the deeper reworkings of our words, I imagine that you can feel a pull, an attraction to using something new, even. If you didn't already feel, as where I'm speaking from an income inequality, so off-put by everybody that has stronger vocabulary than you and can write like they're publishing the scientific, and I mean more than scientific, but the journalings, the academic literatures that are very densely put in their forms, I think need to go and get cozy with the fact that most of society that's in more of a state of partying or, generally trying to create the uprising of their stories, appreciate more from an artistic standpoint and an emotional standpoint. That's still very, very valuable. And like I was saying earlier, with the genetics of our deviations, that it's not a far step to be headed one way or that other. But solace in definition, there is sort of a remeaning of solace, a safekeeping, a base, and maybe something heavenly even. I am struck with a passage of the gospel that I'd like to get to. I don't know if I'm entirely ready to bring a testimony towards it at this time, but I remember it with some thinking that it described that within the world of our God and heaven, that heaven is more like the backtracking thought of God's effort, and everything under God is reaching out to meet what heaven is calling. And I think that is something that is very resonating when you'd imagine a perfect being that is creating the best it ever could be. And as we seek this date within our minds and glossary, it's something that kind of needs our reworkings of our letters and our reconsidering of those amongst the scholarly, centered, and monastic, the meditating, as important that is, and as much as it's like a food, and I guess that sort of answers towards where fasting involves, in my experience, this 20 questions guess who game of date being something that means fasting doesn't have to have any sense of eating, but it is godly, and it is that bounding after heaven when you can find it in peace and God willing. Pledge allegiance again and again and again and again. This chapter began as I wanted to sing the Pledge of Allegiance with a different tone set, a different rhythm and melody. And it brought up the initial idea that every president of the United States should publish their own new version of the Pledge of Allegiance and not change the words so much, politics, but to bring about a sense of timely change and to allow the president a bigger role, a deeper spiritual authority over our country. And it would liven up the sense towards that art is changing and that it, more importantly, is suiting and serving and bringing to pass the natural growth of our becomings. And I also think within this sense of pledging allegiance, and again, that there's the most important truth towards religion in that it takes a lot of dedication to continue to stay the way of our God missions. And however you really say it, right? That our best senses, our best intentions, investments are things that we pledge allegiance to again and again. And that meditation and the need to break some deal of our atheist cataclysm, as much as I'd love for there to be a lot more things to pick out of that kind of idea, within this debate, that there is so much to be brought into a sense of eight that, and I'm jumping around because I don't want to say, oh, well, like, we're just eating and we're just emming and all of this. Like, how about with eight, we say that it's something that is closer towards the meeting and the meeting of our expectations and our willpowers to have something that we all agree towards. And in meditation, in this sense of addressing those momentary strifes that our body endures, so called for help and giving and blessed by the Creator that governs that beautiful arc of our holiness, I think we pledge allegiance, and again. And for this week's your homework, and all the many mistakes that kind of sound like more interesting ways of talking that I have, maybe try and sing the Pledge of Allegiance with a little different kind of thing. Wind of our spiritual glance. This chapter, I really want to share something special, something that gave me the absolute chills when it became to me. And it relates to a deepening of my relationship with my intuition and the ways in which the world responds to me. And I think it reveals an inside of our future that's just begging somehow for us. And of course it came with that expected meeting of my intuition and that world's response as I was blown by a blustered gust of wind on a run with just sort of the perfect air of my trying and the thought that the wind is listening to me, and like that Pocahontas colors of the wind just around the river bend, that sense that the world is giving you its feeling is not just something that is to be joyously brought to a sort of wonderment about. I believe that it represents that the conscious energy that our body works with, the electromagnetic winds of the world are things that our cells are constantly in interaction with. And we are buffeted, we are interrogated amongst this field like a wind. And the visual of, I suppose, an electromagnetic kind of energy, but as far amongst the interactions of our physical forces so known, wind can be something that incorporates a whole lot. It isn't just necessarily a fluid, dynamical flow. It can be a beautiful thing, I think, for you to think for a moment. And our spiritual glance is something that I don't have a lot to say about, but within there being something opened here for you. This is the unlock section of M to Date. Hopefully, always hopefully, there is something to be had in that brief narrative of something that I felt was the moment that something really clicked for me. That idea that it was more than just the wonder that the wind seemed to be at my beck and call of intuitional, forward-stepping, best intentions, but that it was more so than within its metaphorical standpoint. My nose was edging towards this fact to consider more of the winds amongst ourselves and our spiritual energies, and that it is one of, at that moment, to be something that reveals the ways in which we're seeking those truths, is more what I'm saying. It hopefully reveals something for you, because I think largely it's just a simple idea to think, oh, well, yes, of course, there's probably a sense of like a fluid, dynamical electromagnetics amongst our body. I could have more or less just had that within a scientific approach to this, and more sharing it with colleagues. But that it was the guiding force, I think, and it was the hint, it was the knocking, it was what was exciting and enticing. I was aiming. And here it was for us. that you might have the moments to your same. And what else can we do with the fact that the spiritual glance of our efforts truly are wind of each next passing, and nothing is so feigned ever as you bring about what comes and is ended by always your being. There's a closed loop, the system I'm thinking about, I think. But is my alarm going off? I don't think I said that. It's a seal pup. Yeah, over there. No, there's not a seal pup. This chapter really seemed to be one that didn't need this title. But it really is that create a meeting. Or a greeting, I meant. A tempting. And we'll create a meeting out of the greeting and the tempting. As I explained in the introductory overall chapter of M to 8. There was that point in there being something missing. And so that's what I'm saying is the seal pup. I have a cat named Seal, and he is a very, very at interest kind of cat. You know, in the long run, I think I will certainly look back and think that he was such a blessing to love and spend time with and watch him grow in the ways that he can and help him along in the ways that I'm so shown to. In our experience, I still have hope that he can come around and he can evolve, or I don't know, evaporate. There's a much needed admission of the fact that I've done the things that I can to try and bring him into a life with my other cats and me outside of what is a master bathroom and closet that I don't really use except for fish keeping at this point anyways. He lives mostly alone. He has a window to the family area, and he gets to hear things. And when I took him to the park this afternoon, yeah, he hadn't been for a couple weeks, and I felt like it was going to be good to get him out. Most of the time when I take him out, he's still suffering through his happening. I don't know what kind of thing he experiences amongst it, but I heard him on the walk today, and he was sort of hiding his head in the blanket and the carrier I have for him, and I just heard him tell me that, like, I get scared. It was kind of the sense that I received. And he locks up. he has like a very PTSD kind of thing, and I've been interested in how much within the environment he's in he might be able to grow and develop a different type of brain, as much as I'm supporting him more than nutritionally but spiritually and amongst little things. Like I still encourage my other 3 cats to try and reach bond out to him, and I tell them that, amongst their interaction, that they can still find happiness and closeness. And within him being meditative, and as his name is Seal, one of the early, oh my gosh, this is perfect, was the thought of a monk seal. The type of seal that supposedly kind of looks like they have a clouded, or not a clouded, but a hooded cloak. Cloak was where clouded came from, I think. As they pop their head out of the water, and that's where the name monk seal supposedly came from. But also, I don't know. I mean, within the beauty of everything, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have the reason why they call those seals monk seals. Is that too revealing? It might be a little bit, but it's true. In the miracles, I haven't discounted it, at least. But the seal pup, in the sense of the M to date, I think of it as the instances where I see my cat Seal and he's missing something. And it's kind of like his little accident, or it's the moments where he goes into that moment, wherever it is in his life, that caused him to become so antisocial to the other cats. And he's great with me. I've never had so much of a problem. As soon as I separate him from the other cats, he is relatively pretty intelligent. So much of his little vocalizations are really a joy. I don't not mind. Shield it with a couple negatives, opposing negatives. I really mind having Seal, and it's a joy. And as much as that is kind of the alarm of my life, and as much as I kind of like these sections to kind of represent themselves as the topic, as the way I present them, that it's all sort of colored in the ideological factor, that those needing therapy are kind of at this opposing M to date, this lacking of the meditative means to bring themselves back to a God-centered reality. And it takes so much time in the governing lawfulness of the ephemerality to a spiritual mediumship without there being something that is frankly not for everybody. And what I mean by that is the coming unto God or Christ in an exorcist. Exorcist is a common topic, popular topic here. That immediate saviorship that can occur, I think, is not one that I think is in the total interest of the world. Kind of like that spiritual wind thing, that everything is pushing itself along and there's no lack of connective truth in its boundaries. That there isn't a belief in me about those exorcist kind of things, that those demons just go away. And that seal is the opportunity for me to try and watch a few more trying moments in a circumstance that I can only say that I'm pleased to meet. And I hope you have a few more ideas about the ways in which you might have a so pardoned, expressed version. I don't know. I don't want to say like your seal pups. Like those little things that pop up in your life that I hope are tended to with the utmost ability. Seeking heaven and empowered by everyone's beautiful and trying, tested genes, the GNA. Might it be the lights of the unlock, and with the alarm that you seemingly get to be there early for and waiting for it, as if you just need the crackdown of a card shuffle. Let's get up and we're going to shuffle these cards. The shuffle. Here we go. We only have 7 this week. We're going to start off with COVID-19 test subjects. This is hopefully a really inspiring topic. I received it in a state of meditation, in the hopefulness of a podcast, a different podcast. It's the confluence of a couple ideas that might have been about. It's a serious topic and it's speculative. It is the hypothesis that COVID-19 is a disease that was observed to create test mice, test rats. However, they tested it at the lab that it was apparently coming out of in the time that it was released. And those animals showed something miraculous, is the hypothesis. That with my time working with my 3 hamsters, my birds a little bit, and my cats, and there being scripture that details how we interact with animals in such a way that we pass on Christ to them. And as I think my hamsters can behave in such a way that is transcendent of what is largely the consensus online regarding their social behaviors. And trust me, I've seen the instance of some of their defendings of their babies, actually. Surprise, yes, I have baby hamsters now, if you didn't know. I've still tried to keep them interacting and giving them little visits, but with the babies now, there's too much going on, and they do scuffle into something, like after some generally occurrent happiness between them. It doesn't last for very long, but COVID-19, the coronavirus, another one of my old insights was that corona, within the coronavirus, the crown, as much as it's like the spiky, different facets of the virus that connect to other cells and transmit their genetic instructions, right? That it's tied into the coronavirus because in some way it's what is extending the spiritual transformation of ourselves. And I'm running into something big and serious here, so hold on to your hats. That enlightens everybody to access that crown chakra is the old kind of insight that, for me, it turns some paranormal reality into 10x of its normal. When I really have a bad infection of it, it's like, okay, I can feel like the rumbling engine of that leaf blower that I saw earlier today. It's like, wow, like I can, and I hear it in my voice. I can't probably do it on command, but in the moments, it's like I can recreate like the perfect noise and rumble of different things in my world, as if I'm like I have some sort of like direct line to those happenings. And then that's a long first card, but it's really the biggest one that I might have here, in that COVID-19 is miracle kind of, I can't even say it right? But it's huge. It's shutting me up because it might be exactly what our evolution needs. And it's exactly the sense that it is actually turning each of ourselves on more. And our God nucleic acid is firing up because something that the coronavirus brings. And somehow it wasn't going to be let out without it representing something in some of those test subjects. Possibly. It's a whole big hypothesis. It's a conspiracy at this point, I think, hopefully for you. In that it's legitimate. I wonder if you've had some more of those types of instant connections that you would say you would attribute to the coronavirus. Did it open up more of your crown chakra, your connection to higher powers and spiritual ability? Number 2, speciesflation. And these ideas are pretty loaded, and that one I realized was kind of a heavier one than I was ready to embark and drop on the audience going forth. But speciesflation is kind of like it's inflation. It's some of the other type of flations that you might have heard of, and it relates to this M to date category in the ways that both mean that we're trying to seek deeper complexity, which is a big theme here, and that it's making it potentially more volatile of a situation. We've been very worried about species diversity collapse, biological diversity, and I think in some way, all of our genders, we're kind of genderflated right now in this same vein, but that maybe there's something to be drawn about in the air of both of those that is worth discussing. Number 3, understooders versus understanders. This nicely titled little card is centered around the fact that I think, from a personality standpoint, some people are understood more and some people are doing more of the understanding. And this is obviously a hot topic for this kind of category because it highlights that within an M to date, a meditative attempt at both concealing the fact that there is a willpower that is just one's own, as I think when you look at it from a God standpoint, if one person is being too strongly forceful, I think it spells out something disastrous for not just the person that might be in a state to succumb to that willpower, but it's also not probably in the best interest of that person that is taking that strength. And within the aspects of that occurrence, what about it is enticed? And where do those kind of things come from? These shuffles are largely a thought bank. And however much I think I need to maybe reconstitute them, because I don't necessarily have the best laid out plan for how to talk about them. Each one of these cards is something that is real on a teetering scale with whether or not it's something that I understand myself, and so I'm seeking to be more of the understood, or I'm actually more asking of you, and whether or not you would understand much more about speciesflation as kind of a buzzword, for example here. But maybe just keep an eye out and a greater awareness as this is all sort of rolling along. There's something valuable in knowing that if we're trying to tap into this idea of M to date, that there are some people that are doing more of the understanding, asking the questions and listening, and then there are the people that are more acting as the people to be understood. Number 4, the true self of yes. This is an idea that harkens the prime ancient idea of Reiki teaching that your true self is the greatest healer. And as for what that great yes with an exclamation point, capital Y, much towards ecstasy, also rounds out that within our attempts to bring meeting of our misunderstandings into the meditations of our true defining and selves, that true defining and selves. I don't know, is there not just much more to be said about the true self of yes, but that I think in this moment it's more that I need to be understood, and I need to understand out of my understood, sort of as a observational action here. Number 5, no suckling. And this hopefully isn't just more or less a personal PSA on the fact that there is a hope of doing your best spiritual work, I think, by a lot of people, and sometimes you can become too centered on trying to find those trenches of your reality, and at that point I'm saying is where there's a suckling. There's also the point of when you kind of suck at something, and I've thought about, okay, well, what am I going to really say about this? Where did this come from? Because I've kind of lost exactly the initial insight for it, and that's another thing about not writing a lot of notes that I'm still experimenting sort of with. Though, if you suck at something and then you add the LE at the end, that's the creation of the suckle. And I want you to imagine somebody that you would say is not good at something, and they might even would probably say to themselves like, oh no, I suck at basketball. And you know that person that doesn't play basketball so good, and is it really not fun to play with them? There's a tipping point. And if they are more like suckling, I'm describing the fact when that person is gaining something from not playing at a level that they are skilled or at least self-aware towards the other teammates to know. And the aspect of its positivity or negativity is really what I want you to think about. Sometimes it can be funny when somebody isn't playing quite as good, and within gamesmanship, it doesn't have to be the end of the game. It can still be something good, but if they're suckling, like, everybody on that court is going to have a problem. Number 6, the trans Tony winner. I don't have a lot of information. I don't keep notes in front of me other than the shared basic slate of the title chapters and the primary introductions to the idea. So I don't know the name of this person that won a Tony, but the individual was a man and he played a woman, and he received the award on stage as his character, as the woman. I don't even necessarily know if he's trans. I am not speaking on so much of the factuality of it, but hearing about it and thinking about it and giving my heart to it, I saw that within this idea, again, of this empted 8, there doesn't have to be anything wrong with the express consent of somebody to partake in the experience of the opposite sex within reason and within the judged gamesmanship of the world. And it brings about, I think, something maybe really important for that person and for the ways in which they would go on and live in the world. Then I don't think we should feel so oppositional to. And we can only sort of wonder where those people have become so curious and within their meditation developed the curiosity and the interest towards a need that brings about that kind of characteristic. Because understanding the opposite sex is something that I think should be argued, doesn't need to occur. Just as well as I'm saying that, sometimes there is a need to. And as we come to meet those differences, there can only ever be learning. And that's what we can definitely all hold on to. But hopefully, regardless of what side of that kind of question you're on, you can take that thought of being that meditative individual on the opposite sex, and also that there's a strong and very interesting idea in that it should be forbidden to you, and males need, same as females, to keep their identifiably different representations in the world pure, and that as we dilute the pureness of those, there's something that happens, and we're obviously seeing a lot of it. But anyway, number 7, the last one here, nice words. There are words that we say are bad words and curse words, but there are also nice words.